So, anyway, I guess if we're here and nobody else is here, nobody else is coming in, I should say, we might as well start. My name is Evan Weiner. Should I leave the mask on or off?
Off.
Off? Okay, I'm not near anybody, so. Anyway, last Tuesday, I was up at the Atria in Darien, and I'm sure you've heard of the singer Leslie Gore.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, her mother is 99 years old, lives at the Atria in Darien, and I've gotten to be friendly with her over the last 6 months or so. And I was giving a talk on 1952, and she said afterwards, "You made me cry." I said, "Why?" She said, "I was just thinking back to those days." And I said, "Well, the next time I'm here, I'm putting together this rock and roll thing. We don't have a subject for the next thing, but I have a lot of pieces of it." And I said, "You know what, for you, I'm going to put together this rock and roll talk." And we had nothing scheduled for today here, so Wednesday I had the day off. And I said, I got 3 hours, why not? Why not? So I put together the early days of rock and roll, devil's music, so to speak. And that's the Paramount Theater in New York, and Ellen Freed presenting a show. Holiday of Stars, Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis, the Everlys, Buddy Holly and the Crickets, the Rays, Danny and the Juniors, Paul Anka, and a movie with it too. It's called It's Great to Be Young. And Ellen Freed had virtually every big star there, with the exception of Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Elvis. But this is a little later because the Everlys came in 1957. And there is Alan Freed, Cleveland disc jockey. Started on WJW, or was on WJW doing the Hound Dog show back in 1951. This guy, Sam Phillips, discovered Elvis. I don't think I need to tell you who Dick Clark was, but he was not the original host of Bandstand. It was somebody else. Bill Haley and the Comets, with Rock Around the Clock, thought to be the first rock and roll record. There are all kinds of debates, actually, what was the first rock and roll record. Lucille, Little Richard, who recently passed away. Chuck Berry, and the king of rock and roll himself, Elvis Presley.
He was.
Bad influence. Why was he was the king of rock and roll? Why do you say that? Just, he was that good, right? But was rock and roll a bad influence? Rock and roll's the devil's music. Beware the hypnotic voodoo rhythm. Reckless dance down the devils of sin and destruction, leading youth to eternal damnation in the fiery depths of hell.
Here, here.
How many of you listened to rock and roll music back then? And listened to it, and you're still here. This didn't impact you, did it?
Nope.
How much did you spend for your 78s?
Not much.
Not much. They were 33 in the third by your time. This was the top 10, 1950.
Nat King Cole, I watched.
Good night, Irene. Mona Lisa, Nat King Cole, who I love. I think he's great. And he once did a song called "Mr. Cole Won't Rock and Roll." Not true. He did do rock and roll songs. The Third Man Theme, Sam's Song by Gary and Bing Crosby. Simple Melody, also by Gary and Bing Crosby. Music, 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 Teresa Brewer. Third Man Theme, it's number 3, and it's number 7. Guy Lombardo and the Royal Canadians.
Oh, God.
Chattanooga Shoeshine Boy, Red Foley. Harbor Lights, Sammy Kaye. It Isn't Fair, Sammy Kaye. Now, as a teenager, how many of these songs do you really want to listen to Bing and Gary Crosby sing Sam's song? It's going nowhere. Although in the Get Back 8-hour Disney series about the Beatles that just was released, the Third Man Theme is actually played. But Mona Lisa's good. Good night, Irene. Was Louis Jordan the first rock and roller? You can make a case for him. His 1949 song, Saturday Night Fry Fish, is considered a contender for the first rock and roll record. But listen, Fats Domino had the first and maybe the final say on all this. Rock and roll is nothing but rhythm and blues, and we've been playing it for years down in New Orleans. As far as Fats Domino was concerned, it was just a new name for an old form of music. And he said he started playing that music in 1949. In fact, his hit, The Fat Man, was released on December 10, 1949. The title of the first rock and roll song is open to a lot of debate. The Fat Man by Fats Domino, Jackie Brenston's Rocket 88, which might have been named after the Oldsmobile 88, Jimmy Preston's Rock the Joint, and Sister Rosetta Tharpe's Strange Things Happen Every Day. They also might be contenders. Fat Man was one of the first rock and roll songs. Muddy Waters comes out of Memphis. Little Richard, also an authority on rock and roll, said that rhythm and blues had a baby and someone named it rock and roll. A number of important R&B artists were part of the beginning, including Muddy Waters and Willie Mae Thornton, who sang Hound Dog with the original lyrics of Hound Dog, and Big Joe Turner. Rocket 88, Ike Turner from Ike and Tina eventually was part of Rocket 88. In fact, in 1951, it was recorded down at Sam Phillips' Memphis Sun Records. And it's Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cats. But it wasn't the Delta Cats. It was Ike Turner and his King of Rhythm. So Ike Turner might have been on the first rock and roll song. And like I said, it was done down in Memphis. It was a rhythm and blues hit for Chess Records out of Chicago. Rocket 88 was the third biggest rhythm and blues single in jukebox plays of 1951, according to Billboard magazine, ninth in record sales. The lyrics, well, if you grew up in the 50s, this may sound familiar. Cars, girls, sex, alcohol, and freedom, which most rock and roll songs were about, weren't they? What were the Beach Boys about the next decade? Cars and girls. So it was designed to appeal to teenagers. Now these two guys you probably never heard of. They were the Chess Brothers. They came from Poland. They were Jewish immigrants who came from Poland who started a record company in Chicago, Leonard and Philip Chess. And they founded Chess Records. Well, that was good. That was their last name. And it was the preeminent blues label of the 1950s and 60s. They created a monopoly of Chicago music recordings, doing sessions, releasing recordings by every blues performer from Johnny Lee Hooker to Elmo James, the king of the slide guitar, to Bo Diddley, through Jimmy Reeves. Chuck Berry was also on the label. Why Chicago? Because Chicago had opportunities for African Americans to go to work, and they lived on the South Side. They were singing and they were popular, and Chicago becomes one of the first hubs of rhythm and blues in the North. Yes?
Could you just lower the lights a little bit? It's very bright in here.
I don't, where are the lights?
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, they're in the other room.
Oh, they're in the other room? Okay.
Okay,
You know,
sorry.
can't do anything. Anyway, Chess Records had Howling Wolf out of Memphis. These guys out of Memphis, where's the connection? Well, the connection is with Sam Phillips, who owns this studio in Memphis. The Chess Brothers are going looking for talent. Well, there's some talent in Chicago, but they hear there's some talent in Memphis. They hook up with Sam Phillips, and Sam Phillips gives them Howling Wolf, who recorded for him, and also some others like Muddy Waters. And soon they become the biggest label or record company in Chicago featuring that. Big Mama Thornton. Big Mama Thornton. Oh, she's big. She's a big, big woman. And she sang brassy. And she did the original Hound Dog, the one that Elvis sanitized in 1956. She was called Big Mama for her size and her robust, powerful voice. In August, and this would be in 1953, at a recording session in Southwest Los Angeles, she's approached by these guys who are barely 20 years old. A young songwriting team by the name of Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller. who would go on to major success. They have a 12-bar blues vocal called Hound Dog.
Yeah.
The song is filled with open sexual references, whoops and barks, and it tops the rhythm and blues charts. Sold 2 million records. She got $500. Big Joe Turner, Shake, Rattle, and Roll. Shake, Rattle, and Roll. One of my favorite songs. 1951, Joe Turner ends up at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, singing with Count Basie's orchestra. He's a last-minute substitution for a guy by the name of Jimmy Rushing. But he was terrible. He missed cues with the band, and he was terrible. But the Atlantic Records head, Ahmet Erdogan, was there, and he looked at Turner and says, "You gotta be on my label." 1954, Turner records Shake, Rattle, and Roll. You know that one? It became a rock and roll standard. And this is Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Well, people like Bob Dylan and Aretha Franklin said she was the real deal. The real deal. Her first hit was the spiritual Rock Me, recorded back in 1938. She had high notes, and she was making all kind of sexual sounds. She also did a song in 1944 called Strange Things Happen Every Day. Maybe that's the first rock and roll song. But she would have an influence on Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, Aretha Franklin, and others. So let's hear some of that rock and roll music. I was at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame back in 2017 and took a picture of this, the first rock and roll show. It's the Moon Dog Show, featuring Alan Freed, who's just kind of hanging around. He's doing all kind of stuff on Cleveland radio and TV, and he starts playing rhythm and blues songs on WJW in 1951. So he's trying to introduce rhythm and blues to a wider audience, whites. And they were hesitant. The white people did not necessarily embrace black music at this point. And so Alan Freed starts using the word rock and roll to describe rhythm and blues in 1951. So the rhythm and blues records he plays are suddenly rock and roll records. And rock and roll is slang for sex. The Negro community knew all about rock and roll. In 1922, there was a song from Trixie Smith called My Man Rocks With Me with One Steady Roll. Rock and roll. 1922, think of it. 1922.
Wow.
It featured the words rock and roll. You're laughing at this. Going back to the 50s, right? Freed called rhythm and blues records rock and roll, slang for sex. In 1951, one of my favorite songs, I'm Your 60-Minute Man, Billy Ward and the Dominoes, the most sexually explicit R&B hit to cross over to the pop charts. And then comes Bill Haley in 1954, like a bolt of lightning in the movie Blackboard Jungle, and the song Rock Around the Clock explodes. However, it had been around. It had been around. And it wasn't until that movie that people took notice. Bill Haley in his comments, put together in 1952, they were a country music band. They recorded country western style versions of Jackie Brenston and the Delcats, Rocket 88, rhythm and blues song. So, changes his direction. New way of doing things, maybe more successful. And it has some success in 1953 with the song Crazy Man Crazy. It was a national success, but it wasn't all that big. Till this movie. I mean, have you seen Blackboard Jungle?
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a good movie. That was a good movie.
Yeah.
Underneath the credits is this song called Rock Around the Clock.
Oh,
Blackboard Jungle is a social drama about teachers in an interracial inner city school based on a 1954 novel by Evan Hunter called the Blackboard Jungle. The movie highlighted violence in urban schools and helped spark the rock and roll revolution by featuring Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and his Comets. Basically, the movie is this. An idealistic teacher confronts the realities of juvenile delinquency. Maybe that's where, hey, if you listen to rock and roll, you'll become a juvenile delinquent. The film hits a nerve. Brutal depiction of social conditions in urban schools. Fights and riots break out in many towns in England where the movie is shown. The whole film is about juvenile delinquency. And it had a lot of black actors, including Sidney Poitier. And Bill Haley's song ushered in the frightening era for parents. If you listen to the song, it's pretty mild. 1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock.
Yeah.
We're gonna rock.
Tonight.
You know, there's nothing suggestive in those lyrics. But here he is, Bill Haley and the Comets, along with the Teenagers. The song Rock Around the Clock came out in 1954. It was a B-side to another song that Haley put out. But once it's in that movie, boom, that's it. The first rock and roll song to top the Billboard music chart, and it's credited with introducing rock and roll to a mainstream audience. So they recorded the song, Bill Haley and his Comets, in 1954, along with another side called 13 Women and Only One Man in Town, a song about a nuclear bomb blast with left 14 people alive, one lucky guy and 13 women. He must have been worn out. He was the 60-minute man. That song sold about 75,000 copies. When MGM signed a deal with the publisher of that song, Jimmy Myers, for the use of the song in Blackboard Jungle, it was not a well-known song. And there were other juvenile delinquent movies. This one called Juvenile Jungle. And it's all appealing to teenagers. And guess what? There's another thing going on. Teenagers have part-time jobs, have disposable income, can buy records, and also can have a transistor radio. Perfect storm. Teenagers have their own music. Music had been for adults and for kiddies. All of a sudden, teenagers with disposable income, and they had disposable income, would start buying records, 45s. The film's director, Richard Brooks, decided to play Rock Around the Clock over the opening credits of the film. Adults are shocked. I'm telling you, they were shocked by the film's violent disobedience of the teenagers. But younger audiences were not shocked. No, they weren't shocked at all. In fact, if you went to the movies, and I don't know how many of you saw Blackboard Jungle in the movies, but your contemporaries, some of them, started dancing in the aisles when the song was played. In some theaters, there was a perceived link between rock and roll and rebellion and bad behavior. The perception was born. Rock and roll leads to juvenile delinquency. How many of you were juvenile delinquents because you listened to rock and roll music? Anybody in here? Bought the record Frankie Lyman, I'm not a juvenile delinquent? They put one out. Frankie Lyman, I'm not a juvenile delinquent.
Oh, gosh.
Rock Around the Clock sold 1 million copies in March of 1955. Rock and roll, it's about sex and violence. Well, that was the perception. And it featured black musicians in a time when the country was racially segregated back in the 1950s, which meant between the black musicians and the violence and the sex, it's a threat to the establishment of the society. In the 1950s, there was a worry that rock and roll would pull the white man down to the level of the Negro as part of a plot to undermine the morals of the youth of our nation. The irony, the absolute irony of all this, it's Jerry Lee Lewis, is that this kind of music was heard in the church. And some of the people who came out of the Pentecostal church included Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Little Richard, B.B. King. Rock and roll allegedly was the soundtrack of rebellion, but owes a surprising debt to religion of all things. Gospel music, also a major influence, and transistor radios. I still have a transistor radio. I have 5 of them, as a matter of fact. You know why? Because if there's a storm, a hurricane or something, and the internet's down, and my phone's down, and the electric's out, guess what? Battery-powered transistor radio can get you some information. Music and information suddenly became portable. No matter how isolated you were, you could hear the news of the world. Teenagers could listen to music anywhere they wanted, and that included being away from adult ears and under the pillows in their bed. Anybody put a radio under their pillows to listen to radio? A woman told me the other day, I was doing 1955 talk, I used to put the transistor right here, I used to lay right there, and my parents never knew. Never knew. Transistor radio would spark a musical revolution called rock and roll. Teenagers wanted to dance to their own music. How many of you had skirts like that? You had a skirt like that? And you spun around and the skirt went out and all that other stuff? It looked like a carousel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that and the bobby socks and the guys with the dungarees. The Nat King Cole song, Mr. Cole Won't Rock and Roll, makes fun of the dungarees. I won't, Nat King Cole won't do rock and roll.
No.
He sure did a few songs rock and roll, and he was good at it too.
Yeah.
The pop music of the early 1950s was bland. I gave you the top 10 of 1950. I mean, there were, Bing and Gary Crosby had 2 hits. The Third Man theme was up there twice. Anyway, so the American economy is white hot. Disposable income is all around for high schoolers and college kids. And the independent-minded youth of the fabulous 50s, and they weren't supposed to be independent-minded. If you look back at the 50s, you see it's not, wanted their own sound. Why rock and roll? Well, you could dance together with rock and roll. Rock and roll was a new style of music. Really wasn't, but it was. Drew inspiration from African-American blues roots, embraced themes popular among teenagers. Young love. Didn't Paul Anka have a song called They Call It Puppy Love?
Yeah.
They call it puppy love. And rebellion against authority. Chuck Berry couldn't get that safety belt unloose. The perfect storm. Music arrived to teenagers and their pocketbooks, and the new technology, rock and roll, had arrived. Wop, bop, a loop bop, a wop, bomb, boom. Tutti frutti. Tutti frutti. Right? Doesn't make any sense. The words don't make any sense. Tutti Frutti was released in October 1955. A wop, bomb, a loop, mop, a wop, bomb, boom. Now, depending on the day Little Richard was talking, it was either how he talked back to his boss when he was a dishwasher at the Macon, Georgia Greyhound station, or to drum film. Released on Specialty Records, 561. The record entered the Billboard Rhythm and Blues chart at the end of 1955, rose to number 2 early in 1956. But Pat Boone had the big hit of that song.
Oh, yeah.
He had the big hit. Sanitize It. I mean, Little Richard looked threatening. I thought he was great, but it looked threatening. The New York Daily News called the music an insider of juvenile delinquency and pointed to DJ Alan Freed as the chief offender. Now, Little Richard said about Pat Boone, they didn't want me to be in the white guy's way. I felt I was pushed into rhythm and blues corner to keep the rockers out of the rockers' way. So that's where the money is. Sam Phillips would disagree with that, and I'll tell you about that in a few minutes. When Tutti Frutti came out, they needed a rock star to block me out of white homes. Not exactly sure Pat Boone was a rock star.
No.
Because I was a hero of the white kids. The white kids would have Pat Boone upon their dresser and me in the drawer because they liked my version better. But the families didn't want me because of the image I was projecting. Tutti Frutti earned Little Richard, or Richard Penniman, his first Billboard chart entry in 1955, and it debuted at 12 in the best sellers in stores chart in 1950, and number 17 in the most played in jukeboxes tally in 1956. But Pat Boone was better.
Yeah.
The epitome of the rock star, Pat Boone. The year I was born, 1956. He's in Akron, Ohio.
Wow.
Pat Boone didn't think it made any sense for him to sing Tutti Frutti or Blueberry Hill, but he did anyway. At the end of 1955, Pat Boone notched his first #1 hit with Fats Domino's Ain't That a Shame. Although Richard and Fats Domino said they made more money from my versions, this is Pat Boone talking, crossing over into the mainstream. There's an interview with Little Richard when he was asked about me and how he felt when he heard my version of the song, and he said, I was washing dishes at the Greyhound bus station in Macon, and when I heard Pat Boone doing my song, I threw down my towel, and I knew my time had come. Remember I told you I went to Fats Domino's house? A friend of mine in New Orleans took me over to Fats Domino's house, but Fats wasn't there. That's Fats' house down in the 9th Ward in New Orleans. In New Orleans, Fats and Pat Boone performed together once. And Pat Boone, again, talking. In New Orleans, after we were both doing great, I was working at the Fairmont Hotel, and he asked me to come over to Al Hurt, trumpet player Al Hurt, his place where he was playing. In the middle of the set, he held up one of his diamond rings to the audience. You see this ring? This man, Pat Boone, bought me this ring. And we sang Ain't That a Shame together. Maybelline. How many of you use Maybelline products? Did you know that Maybelline became a huge song by Chuck Berry? You don't know how, but you're going to find out in a minute.
He was wearing it?
Well, there was a St. Louis-based singer by the name of Chuck Berry. He goes up to Chicago, and he's going to cut a record for the Chess Brothers and Chess Records. The song is called Ida Mae. Sounded a lot like a song called Ida Red. And Leonard Chess likes the song, but he says, you know, it's too similar to Ida Ray. Gotta give it a different name. Very simple, just change the name. Wasn't that simple? And that was the problem. Nobody could think of the name, said the pianist, Johnny Johnson. We looked up at the windowsill, and there was a mascara box there with the name Maybelline written on it. And Leonard Chess says, why don't we name the damn thing Maybelline? Maybelline, why can't you be true? Oh, Maybelline. And there's Chuck Berry. Big song. Maybelline rose to #1 on the Rhythm and Blues chart in August, #5 on the pop chart. At WINS in New York, now Alan Freed's out of Cleveland. He's moved everything to New York, including the rock and roll concerts that he was doing back in Cleveland. That's all in New York in the Paramount. Do you need me for?
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Just, I was, the
Asked
lights
to
are too bright.
bring down the
So
lights.
I'm going to bring the lights down,
Okay.
okay? Just
Okay.
letting you know.
Okay. Anyway, so Alan Freed is playing the song, same song, for 2 straight hours one night on WINS radio.
Same song.
Same song, 2 hours. Meanwhile, there's one guy in Memphis, Tennessee, who is listening to the song.
Elvis Presley.
He's an unknown singer who's doing kind of mid-level shows around Louisiana.
That's all.
And he adds it to his playlist. This guy, Asa Carter, comes around. He's the head of the White Council, Northern Alabama White Citizens Council, and he wants to get rid of rock and roll music.
Huh.
Segregationists would ban rock and roll hits. Billboard magazine, April 7th, 1956. High school and college students, taverns and restaurant owners, radio stations, most of all, jukebox operators are up in arms over a declaration by a White Citizens Council led Thursday that said rock and roll has to go. Asa Carter, the executive secretary of the Northern Alabama Council, said at a rally that rock and roll music was inspired by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. and other pro-integrationist forces. He indicated that the council would punish the names of the music operators and location owners who failed to ban these records. April 18th, Billboard again. White Council versus, or rather Time Magazine, White Council versus rock and roll. April 18th, 1956. The White Citizens Council of Atlanta, formed to fight desegregation, are equally opposed to jazz, which they consider part of the NAACP, to Mongolize America. Asa E. Ace Carter, self-appointed leader of the North Alabama Citizens Council, said last week that bebop, rock and roll, and all Negro music are designed to force Negro country on Negro culture on the South. Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. Why do fools fall in love? Well,
Yeah.
there's a show down in Asbury Park. And the show is going to be promoted by William and Albert Redekire. They're a pair of jewelers. And they are trying to rent the Asbury Park Convention Center for a rock and roll show. Bill Haley and the Comets had been there the year before. So they booked the show in Convention Hall on June 30th, 1956. Hey, Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers take the stage just before 11 o'clock, and the kids press forward to get a closer look at the teenagers. They haven't done very much. They've done one song, they're getting into their second song, and the fight breaks out. The Asbury Park police are called to the scene, they restore order, but then the fight breaks out again. By midnight, the promoters say, okay, show is over, 3,000 teenagers now go out to the boardwalk. Many fights break out. According to newspapers' account at the time, Asbury Park police called for backups, and they got backups from Red Bank, where Count Basie was from, and Long Branch. And this starts a problem. 25 people are injured, most only cuts and bruises. Dozens of teenagers are taken into custody, although police only filed charges against 8 of them. No more rock and roll shows in Asbury Park. That's it, we're out of here. Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, because of the fights, juvenile delinquency, violence, all that other stuff. Goodbye. Time Magazine, July 23rd, 1956. After a riot in Asbury Park, New Jersey's convention center sent 25 vibrating teenagers to the hospital. The mayor, Roland J. Hines, slapped a rock and roll ban on all city dance halls. Taking the hint, Jersey City canceled Jasmine Paul. Now this is a jazz guy. They didn't want any concert. Paul Whiteman's rock and roll Under the Stars show at the Roosevelt Stadium, which sat 24,000 back then. Bill Haley in the comments, shut out because of the Jersey City ban. And so they decided to put out a song of sorts, a little ditty called Teenage Mother. Sample lyrics include, Teenage Mother, are you so right? Did you forget so soon how much you liked the Charleston? Charleston, remember Charleston was the big deal? Bo Diddley, there's Bo Diddley. Critics hated rock and roll. They hated Elvis Presley's peg pants, his gyrating hips, and Bo Diddley's use of his guitar as the Gautier as a phallic symbol. They were not professional on stage. Excuse me there. Dry. So you know who that guy is, right?
Yep.
You know who that guy is. That guy might be the father of rock and roll. Sam Phillips. Sam Phillips was a guy who eventually made a lot of money by investing in Holiday Inn. Where did he get the money? Let's talk about that. Sam Phillips founded Sun Studios in 1950. He was a producer. He was a white guy. And he's recording the great Memphis bluesmen, Negroes. Howling Wolf, B.B. King. Sam Phillips was looking for a white guy who could sing like a black guy. In 1954, he would find his man, or his man would find him, Elvis Presley. And together they would create the music that came to be known as rockabilly. This is what Phillips told Rolling Stone about Elvis. He was working for Crown Electric. He'd seen the truck go back and forth. He was a driver, truck driver for Crown Electric. I'd seen the truck go back and forth, and I thought, they're sure doing a hell of a lot of business around here. I never saw it stop anywhere. So Elvis had. He had cased the joint a long time before he stopped the truck and got out. No telling how many days and nights behind that wheel he was figuring out some way to come in and make a record without saying, Mr. Phillips, are you auditioning? So his mother's birthday, Gladys, gave him the opportunity to come in and make a little personal record. Sam and Elvis. There wasn't anything striking about Elvis except his sideburns were down to here. But you kind of thought, well, you know, that's pretty damn cool, man. Ain't nobody else got them that damn long. We talked in the studio. I played the record for him in the control room on a little crystal turntable. Walked up front and told Marion, the secretary, write down Elvis's name and number and how we could get a hold of him. Now, Phillips already found his guy. He knows he's got his guy. Nobody else knows he's got his guy. Elvis doesn't even know he's got his guy, but he's got his guy. So Phillips says he's not going to be a ballad singer. So he puts a band together with Scotty Moore as the guitarist and Bill Black on the bass, gets a drummer, DJ Fontana, and they start to record for Elvis. I knew he had the fundamentals of what I wanted. He was the first one who I'd seen who had that potential. He had a different type of voice. And this boy had listened to a lot of different music, from Grand Ole Opry, Bing Crosby, Dinah Shore, to Arthur Crudup, to Bill Monroe, to Hank Snow. The hit, That's All Right. Now, the Grand Ole Opry didn't want Elvis. Didn't think Elvis had any talent. Didn't think he had talent. 1954, he goes over to the Grand Ole Opry in October 2nd, and it doesn't go particularly well. One of the opera officials reportedly suggested Elvis should go back to drive a truck. Well, anyway, Elvis, Scotty, and Bill, DJ's not with them yet, quit their day jobs in mid-October. They appear on the Louisiana Hayride, which was popular in Louisiana and in that area, but certainly not the Grand Ole Opry. This is a Saturday night country music radio show in Shreveport, Louisiana, over the radio station KWKH. The show is the chief competitor to the Grand Ole Opry, carried by 190 stations in 13 states. So Elvis is getting a lot of exposure at the Louisiana Hayride. And then he gets regular appearances. In Elvis, he signs a one-year deal for 52 Saturday night appearances. It's his big break. He has records, he has a regional gig. He should be on his way. He really wasn't quite yet. 1955, Elvis and Sam Phillips. He's making records, Sam's not making much money off of it, and Elvis is kind of stuck in Louisiana. On November 21st, 1955, Phillips makes a decision. He's selling Elvis's contract to RCA Records. I had looked at everything for how I could take a little extra money and maybe get myself out of a real bind. I mean, I wasn't broke, but man, it was hand to mouth. Made an offer to Tom Parker, Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager. The whole thing is, I made an offer I didn't think they'd consider. $35,000, plus I owed Elvis $4,000 or $5,000. Rock and roll artists had not proven themselves yet, although Little Richard said Pat Boone had. Elvis worked hard, sold some records, but was a middle-level performer on the circuit. Elvis would record 24 songs, at least 24 songs for Sun Records, and those 24 were inducted into the United States Congress National Recording Registry in 2002. Stardom. Elvis goes from mid-level circuit star to superstar almost overnight. January 10th for RCA Records, Elvis records Heartbreak Hotel. January 28th, Elvis makes his first national TV appearance on the CBS TV stage show singing the Ray Charles song, I Got a Woman, Shake, Rattle, and Roll, Big Joe Turner, and Flip, Flop, and Fly. Heartbreak Hotel is released February 11th. Goes on the Milton Berle Show, the Texaco Star Theater, which is wrapping up. It's ending its run on April 3rd. On April 6th, Elvis realizes his dream. He wanted to be a movie star, and he signs a 7-year deal with Paramount Pictures. June 5th, he returns to the Berle Show, sings Hound Dog, and does one of these. That gets him in big, big trouble because Elvis the Pelvis is obscene. Now, was he obscene? Yes or no?
He was a singer.
Was he obscene?
No.
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 No, no.
I didn't hear.
And the girls liked him, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
liked that little shake, right?
Sure.
They liked that little shake. Well, Elvis the Pelvis, where'd the nickname come from? No, maybe Bob Holt's column in the Los Angeles Examiner. Elvis the Pelvis Presley, the teenage singing idol who made his break into the big time a short while ago on the Milton Berle Show, helps Uncle Milty to close out his season tonight. No one knows how the nickname started, but to some it was meant to diminish his talents. And Steve Allen is the guy who is going to tame him. Because Elvis, because he shook his leg, is becoming a national disgrace in some people's mind. Puts him in tuxedo. July 1st, Steve Allen's competing against Ed Sullivan, Sunday night, 8 o'clock, and they book Elvis. Why? Because Allen wants to bring some badly needed eyeballs in front of the TV to watch him. The columnist, Charles Mercer, was among those who told Steve Allen in his column, cancel Elvis. Canceled Elvis. NBC weighs in on Elvis's shenanigans. We think this lad has a great future, but we won't stand for any bad taste under any circumstances. What was the bad taste? He went like that?
Yeah.
Stressed. The Taming of Elvis. Steve Allen. Well, you know, a couple weeks ago on the Milton Berle Show, our next guest, Elvis Presley, received a great deal of attention, which some people seem to interpret one way and some viewers interpret in another. Naturally, it's our intention to do nothing but a good show. We want to do a show the whole family can watch, enjoy, and we always do. And tonight, we're presenting Elvis Presley in his, what you might call his first comeback. And there he is,
Yeah.
with the Basset Hound, all dressed up in the tuxedo, and he's going to sing Hound Dog to a Basset Hound who's also dressed up. Most news columnists took delight in Steve Allen's cutting Elvis down to size. Rock and roll seemed to be a threat to the establishment. Elvis was humiliated. The next night on stage, for a performance in Memphis, his hometown, he said, you know, those people in New York are not going to change me none. I'm going to show you what the real Elvis is tonight, and he shook his leg. Meanwhile, Ed Sullivan thought Elvis was vulgar, but money talks. Money talks. And vulgarity goes out the window. So Elvis and Ed Sullivan get together. Elvis said, Ed Sullivan said, he's never going to appear on my show because the obscenity. But he changes his mind, Ed Sullivan does. He sees the ratings for Steve Allen's show.
Yeah.
And he says,
5,000.
I'm going to give him $16,000 for a show, 3 shows. And he signs him, even though he said he would never do it. In August, a judge in Jacksonville, Florida, threatened Presley with jail if he did not restrain himself during his live concerts on August 10th and 11th. He was reduced to moving his pinky finger. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. Well, he's on the Sullivan Show, except Sullivan's not there. He was in a car crash. So Charles Lawton hosted the show on September 9th, 1956. 60 million viewers watched Elvis on Ed Sullivan. October 28th, he's back. And Ed's back too. And viewers, wasn't censored, head to toe. Elvis performing Love Me Tender, Don't Be Cruel, and Hound Dog. But problems started again because of the gyrations on the January 6, 1957 show. Elvis makes his last Sullivan appearance, and he's shot from the waist up, so you don't see his legs move. Elvis did perform a public service before one of the Sullivan shows. Takes the polio shot. Now, you hear a lot of people talking about the COVID-19 shot. I've taken the 3, including the booster. My wife just took the booster yesterday. My son's taking the booster. My daughter-in-law just had a baby. Will be taking the booster shortly. Teenagers were not taking the polio shot. By getting Elvis in front of the camera, in front of millions of Americans on the Sullivan Show, the vaccination rates for American youth went up by 80% in just 6 months. When Elvis got the shots, just 0.6% of teenagers had the shot. Well, Sam Phillips would go on to other things. Some of his other discoveries: Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, Roy Orbison. I think the guy had an eye for talent, didn't he? All 4 of them would be ushering in a new sound of music. There was one recording featuring Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Elvis from 1956 called the $1 Million Quartet. And oddly enough, they sung gospel music, the Rock and Rollers. Carl Perkins inspired the Beatles, worked with McCartney, Harrison, and Ringo Starr. Johnny Cash worked with McCartney. Orbison was part of George Harrison's Traveling Wilburys. Perkins' career would nearly be ruined because of a car crash. In fact, Sam Phillips thought that he was going to be bigger than Elvis, Blue Suede Shoes, that he wrote, and he had the car crash. One of my favorite movies. There's nothing to this movie. The Girl Can't Help It. Lead song by Little Richard. Can't Help It, the Girl Can't Help It, with Jane Mansfield and Tom Ewell, who had been in the 7-year Itch with Marilyn Monroe. There's no story here. There's no story at all. It's just Jane Mansfield walking around with big boobs. That's the whole story. And the rock and roll songs. And that seems to be the star of the show, the rock and rollers. Little Richard performs The Girl Can't Help It. There's Fats Domino and Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent, who had the big hit Beep Bopalula, which my granddaughter, that was one of the first songs she really liked, and still asks for once in a while. The film would get the attention of a 16-year-old kid in Liverpool by the name of John Lennon. Cochran performed a song called 20 Flight Rock. Lennon and McCartney would meet in 1957, and Lennon was impressed because Paul McCartney knew 20 Flight Rock. There were 19 songs in the movie. Gogi Grant was not a rock and roller. She was around in the mid-1960s, 50s, and had the number 5 hit, 1956, The Way Would Win. Take a look at the 56 chart.
It was a good show.
All over the place. 2 Elvis, 1 Nelson Riddle, then the Platters, Gogi Grant, Les Baxter, Doris Day, then Elvis, Memories of Maybe These, Dean Martin, who, by the way, Elvis idolized, and the rock and roll waltz. The rockers had taken over. Long live rock and roll! Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 4 years ago. There's money to be made. Billboard magazine. Rock and roll. A teenage must. November 10th, 1956. Rock and roll is no longer a novelty. Its honeymoon period with the teenagers is over, and a reappraisal of its present appeal and future potential is taking place on the station management level. They're talking about radio. 79 of 179 radio managers participating in the Billboard survey admitted they have to continually increase the programming of rock and roll to public opinion. The typical management attitude today is that a judicious amount of rock and roll, time for peak teenage hours, is obligatory. While there may have been complaints and alienations within other listening segments in the population because of the excessive exposure of rock and roll, most analysts agree that the current music is here to stay. The Big Beat and Jim Crow. Well, there is a lot of resistance to rock and roll. Why? It's African American music. Ellen Freed is on national TV on ABC. It's November and May 4th, 1957. And the show is called The Big Beat. It's on ABC TV. And they decide, well, if it gets an audience, we're going to continue it because of this rock and roll craze. And we'll continue it into 1957-58. And it had an audience, but there was a fatal mistake. Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, Ellen Freed's guest on that first show. After they sing, Frankie Lyman goes into the crowd and dances with a white girl. Guess how long it took to cancel the show after that image? 5 seconds. 5 seconds. The dance scene enraged ABC's Southern affiliates. The network canceled the show. But they had another show. They had another show that they were thinking of. It's in Philadelphia. It's called Bandstand. The original host, Bob Hort. That starts in 1952, October 7th, 1952 on WFIL Channel 6. It's called Bandstand. And it featured the music of the era. Frankie Lane, Tony Bennett, Perry Como, Eddie Fisher. Bob Hort was doing a radio show in Philadelphia, and it was called Bandstand. So, hey, let's bring it to TV. Lee Stewart was the co-host, and there were a lot of local stations that did local music shows. Bob Hort would be replaced by Dick Clark on July 9th, 1956. Horton's had some problems. He was an alcoholic, and allegedly he had predatory sexual behavior. And this leads to the handsome, squeaky clean Dick Clark. Clark would take the show from a local Philadelphia program to a national audience on ABC. How many of you watched the Bandstand show in its heyday from Philadelphia with the dancers and Frankie Avalon, right? Fabian, Bobby Rydell. The name of the program would be changed to American Bandstand. So how many of you watched that back in the day? You watched it, right?
Sure.
Every afternoon. Clark pitched the program to WFIL's parent company, ABC, which was looking for shows to put on its network because they were a struggling network at the time. And he said, listen, you'll get the youth demographic. And ABC wanted the youth demographic. On August the 5th, 1957, ABC does the first American Bandstand in color, filmed live in Philadelphia from 3:30 to 4 o'clock Eastern Time. It's an immediate ratings smash. 2 days later, Paul Anka is the first performer, and he makes his American debut on the show with a song called Diana. Remember Diana? By February 1958, daily viewership reached 8,400,000. It was ABC's top-rated program. Some of the people who made their debuts, Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel as Tom and Jerry, November 2nd, 1957. Jerry Lee Lewis, March 8th, 1958. Dion and the Belmonts from the Bronx, Little Italy, not Arthur Avenue rather. That's the Bronx, Little Italy, on August 7th, 1958. 1957, Elvis, Mike's Graceland. Rock and roll is blazing in 1957. Elvis is the king of rock and roll. He's got 4 different #1 singles, 25 weeks on the chart. American Bandstand goes live, cross country. Jerry Lee Lewis emerges. Bill Haley and his Comets complete a successful world tour, including the UK, Europe, and Australia. Little Richard is ripping it up the charts, and he's got Lucille. April 1957, the Dell Vikings, number 4 on the U.S. pop chart, number 2 on the rhythm and blues chart with their debut single, Come Go With Me, which is a great song. Send For Me, song written by Ollie Jones, is performed by Nat King Cole, featuring the McCoy Boys. It reaches number 1 on the U.S. rhythm and blues chart, number 6 on the pop chart. Remember I said Mr. Cole don't rock and roll? Mr. Cole does. Little Richard's records sold. By 1957, Pat Boone was doing Love Letters in the Sand, not Little Richard covers. I was the originator, but the parents didn't let their kids buy my records. They told them to buy Pat Boone records. Come Go With Me. July 6, 1957, John Lennon and the Quarrymen, Liverpool, England, doing a church fete. The annual Wilton Parish Church Garden Fete is where Lennon meets McCartney. It was a skiffle group. That was what they did. Washboards, all kind of weird-looking instruments. Paul McCartney is watching. He's impressed with Lennon's ability to ad-lib and place of forgotten lyrics in songs like "Come and Go With Me." And then, backstage, McCartney is carrying his guitar for whatever reason, and he unleashes 20 Flight Rock. It was a guy by the name of Ivan Vaughn, who knew both Lennon and McCartney, who introduces them. Paul pulls out the guitar, starts playing 20 Flight Rock, Beat Bop Lula, Little Richard numbers. A couple weeks later, the foundation of the Beatles is solidified. Lennon and McCartney decide we're going to be in a band together. At release, what the Beatles want to sound like. Don and Phil, more important for Nashville. They were the first consistent, successful rock and roll act to come out of Nashville. Their management was there, their songs came from Nashville, and they recorded there with local musicians. Some of the songs you might remember: Bye Bye Love, Wake Up Little Susie, All I Have to Do Is Dream, Bird Dog. They became members of the Grand Ole Opry on June 1st, 1957. We're coming toward the end.
Good.
The end is 1958, the end for the originators. Rock and roll comes to a halt. The adults win. Rock and roll pioneers are elsewhere doing to various reasons. Elvis joins the Army.
Yeah.
He's inducted March 1958. He finished his movie King Creole, sings part of the soundtrack. He's gone. Goes down to Fort Hood, Texas, records some music, but nothing really. According to John Lennon, Elvis died creatively when he joined the Army. Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, Little Richard and Fats Domino would fill the void, except Little Richard is gone. He's going to Bible school. He doesn't know if he's between a rock and a hard place here, or the devil in Deep Blue Sea. He gives up music in 1957, goes to an Alabama Bible school named Oakwood College, and he becomes an ordained minister. He would have one more hit, Good Golly Miss Molly, in 1958, never to see the top again. Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old cousin. At the age of 13, Myra Brown married Jerry Lee Lewis in Mississippi on December 12, 1957. Lewis is on the tour of Europe and London, 37 days. Brown reveals to a reporter that she was his wife. Lewis asserted Brown was 15, which I guess is okay in the South then. And his wife 2 months. The British tabloids ripped Lewis to shreds. His career took a nose dive right after that. George Harrison would join the Quarrymen. February 6th, George Harrison joins the Liverpool skiffle group, the Quarrymen. Harrison is added to a lineup that features John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Len Gary, Eric Griffiths, and John Lowe. Those last three would not survive. Harrison is recommended to Lennon by McCartney, who says he's great. Lennon says he's 14. Harrison got in by playing the hit Raunchy. They record 2 songs in 1957, Buddy Holly's That Would Be the Day, and a McCartney-Harrison composition, In Spite of All the Danger. Rock and roll's banned in Boston. A May 3rd, 1958 show at the Boston Arena. Major problem for Alan Freed. He's charged with inciting a riot. He emceed and managed the 17-act Big Beat show. Featured Jerry Lee Lewis, Frankie Lyman, Chuck Berry, Danny and the Juniors. The kids packed the aisles, singing along, dancing, but things got out of hand. A few bottles were broken. Scuffle broke out. Police stopped the show. Banned in Boston. 15 people were beaten and robbed in the streets after the show. None of the perpetrators were ever caught. The only arrest, Alan Freed, charged with inciting a riot. The case never went to trial. But the mayor on May 5th, John Hines, barred rock and roll songs in the city of Boston. Those so-called rock and roll music programs are a disgrace and must be stopped. As far as I'm concerned, Boston has seen the last of them. East Coast cities banned rock shows. And the real end to the early days of rock and roll, payola and rock and roll. Alan Freed. Payola had been around since the days of Al Jolson. DJs got gifts or cash exchanged for airplay. The adults and the establishment felt threatened by rock and roll and the changing lifestyle. It was time to kill off rock and roll, go after the disc jockeys for bribery. Alan Freed was the only one they went after. Alan Freed and Dick Clark both played important parts in the rise of rock and roll. Both denied they ever accepted payola. Freed ended up taking the fall for all the disc jockeys. His career was ruined. He lost his job at WABC. Dick Clark survived. Freed was defiant. Dick Clark was squeaky clean. Clark refused to play cover versions of black songs, like Tutti Frutti. I'm not going to use Pat Boone. But Clark was smart. He got rid of all the evidence, incriminating evidence. He had part ownership in 7 independent labels, 6 publishers, 3 record distributors, 2 talent agencies. Committee chairman, Orrin Harris, called Dick Clark a fine young man. This guy here, Mitch Levy, who's still on WINS radio, Mitch Levy took the place of Alan Freed at a sock hop in Long Island. He was 16 years old. He was a 16-year-old rock and roll disc jockey who, coincidentally, introduced Bruce Morrow to the New York market. 1959, the day the music died, that's Diamond Dave Somerville of the Diamonds. And he was on the Buddy Holly tour when Buddy Holly got killed. In the early morning, February 3rd, 1959, 3 performers, Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson, joined their pilot, Roger Peterson, for what was supposed to be a flight to the next stop. But the passengers and the pilot never made it. They were involved in a deadly plane crash, and that took all their lives, the day the music died. Dave Somerville told me the story. He said that Buddy Holly just wanted to take a shower, sleep in the bed. Didn't want to be on the bus. It's in the book, Boys on the Bus, that Dave put out. He said that he just wanted a rest. Paul Anka and Fabian were brought in to finish the tour. While it's known as the day the music died, one of the earlier tour stops was Duluth, Minnesota. And Buddy Holly made a favorable impression on a teenager named Robert Zimmerman who watched the show. He'd be known as Bob Dylan. Ray Charles. What I Say, it's a great song, What I Say, was created when the singer somehow ran out of material near the end of a gig in Brownsville, Pennsylvania. He began playing a rocking riff, improvising lyrics over it. And he told his background singers, the Raylettes, I'm going to fool around. You all just follow me. And the instant classic was born in a call-response style. But the song becomes a problem. A, it's too long. And it has lyrics like, shake that thing, and orgasmic sound. What I Say was banned by many black and white radio stations. Mr. Freed would go to Washington in 1959-60. In 1959, in the closed and open sessions before the U.S. House Oversight Committee, 335 disc jockeys from around the country admitted to having received over $263,000 in consulting fees. That figure was only the tip of the payola mountain. Before the hearings, Phil Lind, a Chicago disc jockey at WAIT, said he got $22,000 to play one song. The trial heated up. 2 most influential jocks in the country took the stand. That would be Freed and Dick Clark. In 1960, Congress amended the Federal Communications Commission Act of the 1930s that outlawed would outlaw under the table payments and required broadcasters to disclose if any airplay for a song had been purchased. There would be a misdemeanor, penalty of $10,000 in fines, and a year in prison. Chuck Berry seemed to escape, but he didn't. Rock and roll became sanitized by 1960. The raw sounds are gone. Ricky Nelson, Tommy Sands, Bobby V, Bobby Rydell, Fabian, Frankie Avalon, Del Shannon were the teen idols. Elvis, Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis became history. December 29, 1959, Chuck Berry is arrested in St. Louis. Charged transporting a 14-year-old girl across state lines for allegedly immoral purposes, the 1910 Mann Act. Berry is convicted. March 11, 1960, sentenced to 5 years in jail, $5,000 fine. He would appeal, and there were some problems about racial comments made by the judge in the original trial. He'd be convicted again in March of 1961 and then spend 2 years in jail. 1960, the rawness of rock and roll is gone. #1 song of the year, Percy Faith. #2, Jim Reeves. Finally, the Everlys. Running Bear. Running Bear. It's a terrible song. Teen Angel. Terrible song. I'm Sorry, Brenda Lee. Elvis Comes Back, Now or Never. Handyman. That was a good song, Jimmy Jones. Stuck on You. And the #10 song with Usher in the 60s. Chubby Checker, The Truth. The Legacy. Oh, Steve Allen Show. Elvis being a cowboy. Alan Freed died a broken man, January 20th, 1965. 1986, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. 1991, he was given a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. 2002, he received the Grammys Trustee Award. You know all about Dick Clark, American Bandstand, the Pyramid Game Show. He owned a radio network and the TV New Year's Eve shows. Sam Phillips never regretted selling off Elvis's contract. He made a lot of money investing in what was a small hotel chain called Holiday Inn. Steve Allen wrote many songs, claimed there was no pressure to tame Elvis. Elvis became the king of rock and roll, but he never regained his throne. Goes into the army in 1958. Little Richard never had a big hit again after 1958. Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis continued performing, but never achieved the heights again. Ray Charles continued performing, had some big hits. Johnny Cash had some big hits. He's in the Rock and Roll and Country Hall of Fame. Carl Perkins never regained his stature after a car accident. Phillips thought he'd be bigger than Elvis. Bill Haley in the comments found some success in Europe, but he's largely forgotten. And there was a modest revival when the TV show Happy Days in the 1970s used Rock Around the Clock for its opening. Ronnie Gore. It's a friend of mine. She's 99 years old. Here's her daughter. Here's Quincy Jones. The Chess Brothers were elected into the Blues Hall of Fame. Interest in rock and roll began to subside in America, but in Britain, in the big urban centers, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, and London, they got hooked on American rock and roll and blues players. Women singers were not prominent in the 1950s. Leslie Gore, 1963's hit, You Don't Know Me, may be a feminist hit. Prior to the 1950s and 60s, songs by women in rock and roll were about boys getting dumped, getting approval, bragging about boys who liked them.
Gory little Leslie.
Leslie, her mother's a real pit. The Beatles and Ed Sullivan got 73 million viewers on February 4th, 1964. Rock and roll shows returned to Boston. The Everlys had a successful act between 1957 and 62. Only Elvis and Pat Boone outsold them to that point. And they were major influences on the Beatles and Simon and Garfunkel. The rebellious teens like you grew up. There were new trends. The era was brief, 1954 to 58, but there was a whole lot of shaking going on. Thank you so much. Any questions or comments?
Thank you.
Relived your youth, huh?
Yeah.
Relived your youth. Any of your favorites before I get out of here? Where I get all of them.